Good morning and welcome to Greece. It's a fabulous day. My name's Andrew and I live here in Greece. About 3.5 years ago, my wife and I retired here to Greece. And I thought in this video what I would do is share some of the costs that we incur in living here. I thought if you're perhaps thinking about moving to Greece or becoming a digital nomad here or even retiring here, then you might be interested to know what bills we have to pay, what bills we choose to pay and how much they actually cost us. So I've got some numbers for you, annually and monthly, and hopefully this video will be useful to you. I'm also going to compare them a little bit to other countries just so you get a flavour for how you can live in Greece and what it's going to cost you. I hope it's useful. Now, just before I get into the detailed costs of living here in Greece, I think it's very important to talk about the actual cost of living for Greeks in Greece, because we have to put this in perspective. As a foreigner, I have an overseas income. I effectively have a UK income. Now, the minimum wage in the UK, I think, is something like €2,600 a month. It's one of the absolute highest within Europe, not the European Union, of course, thanks to Brexit, but within Europe. And relatively, therefore, my income goes a long way in Greece. But for a lot of Greeks, the situation is entirely different. The minimum wage in Greece at the moment is about 830, something like that, €830 a month. And as a proportion of their wages, the cost of living in Greece is much, much higher. And therefore for Greeks, the cost of living in Greece is an absolute nightmare. And I think it's absolutely right that we recognise that. For foreigners, it's a land of absolute joy to retire to, because as a proportion of most incomes from outside Greece, it's a very small percentage. But for the Greeks, the cost of living is a very serious issue. My in-laws, when they retired years ago, round about, unfortunately, the time of the Greek crisis in 2010, they had their pension cut by almost 50%. It was a complete nightmare for them. And for the elderly and the young in particular in Greece, it remains challenging. And the cost of living rises everyone's experienced across Europe and the globe in general, energy prices, food prices and so on, have had a huge impact here in Greece on the actual Greeks. Now, that's not to say things aren't getting better. Things are getting much better. You can see behind me, people are out, people are spending, people are enjoying, and these are Greek people. These are not foreigners here in ENFIA. But that does not get away from the fact that everything I'm about to say here, and I'm going to talk about the fact that Greece is cheap, does not generally apply to the Greeks themselves. I have friends here, middle managers in big blue chip firms. They earn €1,800 a month. They struggle to live when they have a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage. It's challenging for people. So I just wanted to lay that out before I get into the details here and talk excitedly about how for foreigners retiring in Greece or moving to Greece or living in Greece, cost of living is fantastic. So let's start with a summary of costs. I think for about €1,000 a month, my wife and I, if we only pay our essential bills, can live in Greece comfortably. Now that's going to vary from person to person, and I'll break all that down in a minute. But very simply, we spend about €250 a month on living in our home. We spend about €150 a month on our car. We spend about €70 a month on internet and mobile phones. We spend about €500 a month on food, groceries, home care, etc. And then we spend about €100 a month on healthcare. So add it all together, we're talking about €1,000 a month. Obviously you want more than that to live on because you want to live beyond the essentials, but those are our essential costs. And this is how I get to them. So let's start with the obvious one. Housing. Everyone needs somewhere to live in Greece. You're going to rent or buy a house. So what's it going to cost you monthly and annually to do so? Well, my wife and I actually own our place in Greece. I think being retired, this is really critical. It gives us a degree of security. No one's going to take it away from us. But if you have to rent, you're probably looking at between €7 and €14 per square metre per month, depending on where you are in Greece. Obviously, if you're in Athens, you're going to be at the upper end of that or even higher. But €350 a month should get you a 50 square metre apartment. That's a 1-bed apartment. Now you might need bigger than that, just multiply it up as you go. 100 square metres, 700 a month. And it just depends on where you live in Greece. If you're in Athens, you probably double those figures. Now, if you want a mortgage, it's very difficult to get a mortgage in Greece, particularly as a foreigner. Mortgage rates are about 4%. If you can, buy outright, right? If you can't, I would advise renting. And you may well want to move anyway. If you buy, you're stuck. So, what other costs do we have? Well, for my wife and myself, our monthly costs of owning a property in Greece are about €250. We start with ENFIA. ENFIA is property tax here in Greece. Everyone has to pay it, and it's effectively a function of where you live and the size of property you live. Literally, it's that multiple. They have Zone A, Zone B, Zone C, Zone D, etc. Zone A is Athens. Zone C, where we live, we pay 27 euros a month property tax. Now, people moan about that a lot in Greece because property tax has only existed for the last 10 years or so. But compare it to the UK. If I owned a similar property, a similar distance from Athens in the UK, I can tell you now it would be about 300 euros a month for the property tax. So instantly we're at 10% of the cost of living in the UK for a major bill. Then we have obviously the utilities, electricity, the key one. Now you can reduce your electricity to virtually nothing if you have solar here. And why wouldn't you have solar here? Installation of solar is very cheap, perhaps less than €1,000 for a decent hot water system. You'll never have to pay for your hot water again. But if you don't, and we haven't unfortunately yet, then you pay electricity. Because outside Athens, the only energy source really is electricity. So we pay about probably €100 a month across the year for our electricity bill. That includes the aircon, that includes the hot water. We don't heat the house with electricity, we use heating oil. And heating oil in Greece at the moment is about €1.27 a litre. Last year we used 60 litres, so it's virtually nothing. We have water. We pay 17 euros a month for water. Now that may go up because they're just changing the rules at the moment. The government's introducing a demand-based charge system whereby if there's less water available, you will pay more for it should you use it. But then you have other costs. If you live in a flat block, you have maintenance costs. Now our maintenance costs go towards the maintenance of the elevator, payment of communal bills such as electricity, etc. And we pay about 70 euros a month. So we have 100 for our electric, we have 17 for our water, we have 70 for the maintenance, we have virtually nothing for heating because, let's face it, it doesn't generally get cold here in the south of Greece, and we have 27 for ENFIA. All in all, that adds up to perhaps 200 to 250 euros a month. So you can see, if you own your own property in Greece, if you don't live in an extremely expensive area or an extremely expensive flat block with very, very high maintenance fees, the cost of actually living here in a property in Greece is very, very good. So this brings me quite nicely on to cars. Now, my strong advice is if you live in Athens, you do not need a car. Public transport in Athens is fantastic and you can get away without a car. But should you live outside Athens, you're almost certainly going to need a car. And my strong advice again is if you can, if you have the means, purchase one outright. You can keep it for 10 years, you can change it whenever you want, it doesn't matter. But keep it and purchase it outright. If you need to finance it, there are firms who do it in Greece. Actually, funnily enough, a lot of the hire car firms do it. Hertz, Avis, etc. Very common here. But they'll charge you typically 20% of the value of the car to lend you the money to purchase it. So if you can avoid that, I would do so strongly because it's an expensive way to obtain a car. Now, cars here, we've noticed generally, myself and my Northern European friends, are typically 10 to 15% cheaper as a list price compared to Northern Europe. So actually there are some good deals to be had here. But once you've got your car, what do you have to pay for? Well, firstly, obviously insurance. Now, car insurance in Greece, in my opinion, is fantastic. Simply because you insure the car, not the driver. In the UK, you insure the driver. You want another driver to drive, you have to put that driver on your policy or they have to have a separate policy. Not in Greece, you insure the car. And provided the driver meets all the necessary licensing requirements, they can drive that car and be fully insured on one policy. It's brilliant. I wish they'd do it in the rest of Europe, but I'm sure they won't because, of course, it's going to cost the insurance companies money. It also means there's zero discrimination. It doesn't matter if you're 75 or 25, you pay the same because you're insuring the car, not the driver. Our car insurance costs are about 30 euros a month. Now, I could probably cut that, but that includes everything. We're fully covered for everything regarding our car. We have a 2021 Golf Mark 8 for those interested. It's only 1 litre, but it's got a little turbo in it. It's great for zipping around here. So 30 euros a month. We do it with one of the online firms, Hellas Direct. There are several of them. And traditionally, insurance in Greece has been done through brokers. I have found them to be really expensive. We started doing it with brokers. It was a nightmare, hugely expensive. Then we went online. It's a new thing in Greece, relatively new, 4 or 5 years. Did it with an online platform and we saved a huge amount of money. So my advice is if you're insuring, do it online. But insurance in Greece is great, 30 euros a month, and we pay 30 euros a month. You can pay monthly. Road tax. Now, road tax, when you buy your car, you pay a one-off sum that covers you for the first 4 years. It's entirely dependent on the size of the engine and the emissions that come from that engine. In Greece, anything over 2 litres attracts a luxury tax. So if you can avoid anything over 2 litres, I would personally save you a huge amount of money. But once you hit that 4-year limit, firstly, you have to have a KTEO. That's effectively a vehicle safety check. You have to have it done annually from the 4th year after the car was first registered here in Greece. And it costs about 50 euros, assuming, of course, that it passes. And then from that point onwards, you pay an annual road tax. Now, it's not huge, depending obviously on the size of your car. I think for ourselves, it's going to be 40 or 50 euros, but we haven't got to that point yet. Petrol, you need to drive around, you need to fill your car. If it's not electric, I would avoid electric in Greece at the moment. The charging network here is diabolical. I really would avoid it. I'd go for petrol. Everyone goes for petrol unless you're a taxi, then you go for diesel. Petrol here, currently about €1.70 a litre. That's probably the median. I've seen it as low as 1.65. I've seen it up at €2.10. So petrol actually quite expensive here. So you might want to think about the fuel efficiency of your car. And then when you're driving around, the roads are great here, but if you go on the freeways or the motorways, they are toll roads. You have to pay, and they can be quite expensive, particularly towards Athens. We're 180 kilometres from Athens here. If we drive to Athens and back, which is perfectly reasonable to do, takes about 2 hours using the motorway, it will cost 20 euros approximately in tolls. So they add up very quickly. If you go to Athens twice a month, that's 40 euros. That's not including petrol, wear and tear on the car and so on. So costs of driving in Greece, relatively good, but it depends where you go, what you do, how often you drive, and what you drive, obviously. Now, I come to number 3, mobile phones and internet in Greece. Let's deal with internet first. If you're in Athens, you can probably get gigabit internet, and it will cost you pretty well what it will cost you across Europe, maybe 50, 60, 70 euros. Just depends on the package you go for. But you can also get, obviously, slower internet. If you're outside Athens, you may be lucky to get internet. If you're going to live somewhere outside Athens, first of all, check that you can actually get internet. And if you can, what speed is available, because it may not be sufficient for you. Where we live, Astros, we can only get 50 megabits per second download and 6 megabits per second upload. Now, trust me, with YouTube, that's a nightmare because it takes me 6 or 7 hours sometimes to upload one of these videos. This one probably will take 6 or 7 hours. It's very slow. I can't get faster, and it costs me €32.20 a month. Now, the good thing is it costs me €32.20 a month, every year. The prices never seem to go up. In Northern Europe, they put the prices up like 10% every year. It's a nightmare. But here in Greece, the prices stay pretty fixed. But internet, check. You can get internet where you are and check what speeds you can get. Now, if you then talk about mobile phones, I think this is one of the most expensive things in Greece. I think mobile phones in Greece are a rip-off, and I'm not sure why. But compared to, say, the UK, it's incredibly expensive. My wife, we buy our own mobile phones. I have a no-debt policy. When you're retired, you tend to have a no-debt policy. And if you're interested in how we retired early and what we do, tell me in the comments. I'll make a video about it. But we buy our own phones, so we're paying SIM only. My wife pays SIM only €27.20 a month here in Greece. Now, I think it's a complete rip-off, but she negotiates it, she does that. She gets for that 15 gigabytes of data a month, unlimited calls, unlimited texts. Well, no one texts nowadays, and very few people actually call. So you're really just paying for the internet, WhatsApp, etc. But I think it's a complete rip-off. What I do is I have a UK SIM, because we have a UK address that we can use. I have a UK SIM. With O2, you get free roaming. You get 15 gigabytes a month, so the same as my wife, unlimited call, unlimited text, and I pay approximately €8 a month as a comparison for the same package. So mobile phones in Greece, expensive, and the packages are a complete rip-off. So now we come to food and grocery shopping. So household essentials, cleaning materials, the stuff we eat, etc. And my wife and I, as a couple here, we spend about €500 a month. And I think the costs actually are very comparable to Northern Europe. The breakdown may be a little bit different, but the costs, in my opinion, are very, very similar. If I break it down a little bit, for example, olive oil, the land of olive oil, Greece. You would expect olive oil to be cheap. Well, yesterday we bought 3/4 of a litre of virgin Greek olive oil, cost us €13. Absolutely ridiculous. Nescafe, hugely expensive. We bought Nescafe Gold here, large jar, €11. These things add up really quickly, but at least they last a while. On the other hand, produce. I mean, the produce in Greece is the best in Europe. It's brilliant. It's seasonal, but you can get produce incredibly cheaply here. I love coming here because I can buy huge punnets of peaches, tomatoes, etc. in my local shop for peanuts, nothing at all compared to the cost in Northern Europe, and they taste so much better. So it swings and roundabouts and depends on what you like and what you want to eat. Now, we spend probably about 65% of our money, let's say €350, in the supermarkets. You have some good supermarkets here. Even in the regions, they have supermarkets. Sklavenitis, My Market, AB Vassilopolis, etc. They're all much of a muchness. They all offer a supermarket experience. I personally prefer the local mom and pop shops, although you pay a little bit more, but you get fresher produce and so on. For produce, for meat, go to the butcher, you just can't beat it. I wouldn't buy those things in the supermarket. Pay a little bit more, you get a lot more for your money. And then you have the Laiki. Now, the Laiki is effectively the weekly market that occurs in most towns and villages in Greece. Once a week, you get this fantastic outdoor market that sets up. You can buy pretty well everything there: vegetables, meat, foods, clothing, etc. You have to be a little bit careful. Obviously, it's buyer's seen. If you buy something that's rotten or doesn't fit, you're stuck with it. But if you really want to cut your bills, go to the Laiki once a week. But generally, I found for my wife and myself, because we're not necessarily trying to really economise, €500 a month, and we're comfortable. The last of my essential costs in Greece, before perhaps we get to the luxury or optional costs that we incur: healthcare and dental. I think probably as an average over a year, my wife and I spend about €100 a month on healthcare and dental here in Greece. We have some prescriptions, we get those. We have some doctor's appointments. We obviously maintain our teeth, although you may not think so looking at my videos. And about €100 a month. And I have said it before and I will say it again, and I'm doubling down on it. Healthcare in Greece is amongst the best in Europe. And I know that will rile some of my Greek viewers, but the simple fact is, as an overall package, it is so much better than the NHS in the UK. It is so much better than the insurance-based healthcare system in the US, and I wish people were more grateful for it. It's accessible, it's affordable, and the doctors are fantastic. I was talking with one of my doctors about this last week, and he's so frustrated about it because the doctors here are world class. They're brilliantly trained, they're highly capable, and they have access to some of the best medical equipment in Europe, partly because they're part of the European Union. And should I want to see a doctor, I can see a doctor tomorrow in a specialism. I don't need to go via a GP or an alternative route. I can just phone up a specialist and go and see him or her, and it will cost me between 40 and €50 for a 30-minute appointment. I have an AMCA. An AMCA is like the number that gives you healthcare here free of charge, provided you've paid your social security. I don't pay social security here as a foreigner, but I do have an AMCA. But you go to the pharmacy to get medicines. They are less expensive than they are in the UK. I can tell you now, probably sometimes 80 or 90% cheaper than they are in the UK. Not everything, obviously. Some things are more expensive, but healthcare in Greece is affordable and accessible. And then we come to dental. I go to a fantastic English-speaking dentist in Athens. She charges me €50 to see me for a general checkup. She charges me 50 plus 50 if I have a filling or two. And I had emergency root canal last year with her. It was emergency. I turned up, I was in pain. She dealt with it. It took her an hour and a half. She charged me €250 only. She's not doing me a favour. That's just the standard costs here. So healthcare and dental in Greece, €100 a month, but they are fantastic value. And the people who provide these services are highly trained, highly capable, often speak multiple languages. And I just think we should be grateful for what we have here in Greece because it's brilliant. As a foreigner who has experience of other healthcare systems, I always choose to come to Greece and do my healthcare because it is absolutely brilliant. Now that brings me to inessential costs, shall we say, that we incur in Greece. Let's start with eating out and hospitality. My wife and I like to eat out. We eat out a couple of times a week. We also try to maintain a social life with our friends. If we go for a meal, It depends on the restaurant that you pick as to what you'll pay. If you go for a souvlaki, you should be paying 3, 4, 5 euros for a souvlaki. It just depends where you go and what you're paying. But if you go for, let's say, an upmarket meal here, I'm not talking about Athenian 5-star cuisine, I'm talking about good Greek cuisine or good Italian cuisine, which are very common here. Typical meals here in Nafplio, for example, you're probably talking 25 to 30 euros a head, including alcohol. So 60 euros, and I would say that is probably top end. I've often eaten out here and spent 50 or 45 euros. It just depends what you eat, what you drink, how many courses you have, etc. But compared to Northern Europe, I can tell you now, double the price in the UK, probably triple in the US. It is very, very affordable to eat out here and enjoy hospitality. One thing that is generally more expensive are branded drinks. Now, if you go to a restaurant here, I would advise that you order a carafe of wine, half a kilo or a kilo, depending on how thirsty you are. That should be 3.50, 4 euros for half a carafe of wine. It's local wine, barrel wine, might not be the best thing you've tasted in the world, but it's perfectly palatable and it's a good way to drink alcohol here cheaply. The moment you go for branded spirits, branded bottles of wine, etc., the prices shoot up. Typically think Bacardi Coke outside of Athens, 8 to 10 euros for a drink. And it's fairly common, that price, across all the drinks here. You go to Athens, obviously, the prices shoot up. You could be talking 14, 15, 20 euros for the same thing. And often in these bars, in these restaurants, particularly in Athens, they'll put a bottle on the table. It will be a 100 euro bottle. They'll expect you to, as an absolute minimum, buy that bottle just to get that table. But take your pick, choose what you want, and you can see Nafplio, hugely popular with tourists here. It's a real tourist town. Personally, would I live here? I think there are better places. Kalamata, I've done a video on it. If you want to know where I would recommend living in Greece, look at my video on where to live in Greece. But Nafplio, not a bad place. So this brings me to the final section of my video, which I'm going to call general purchase. And what I mean by that is clothing, housewares, home furnishings and electricals. So let's deal with clothing first. You can pay what you want for clothing. Go to Athens, you can pay designer top prices, up to you. But if you want to really maximize your value, you go to the Laiki, the town market that I mentioned earlier, you go to the supermarkets, or we also have a chain of shops here called China Shop or Chinatown or China City, depending on the size. Most towns have them, run by Chinese people, Chinese clothes direct from China, sold incredibly cheap. You're not talking stylish or fashion here, but you're talking about functional and fit for purpose. Obviously, then you have the middle of the road. You have H&M, you have Zara, you have all the European brands here. So when it comes to clothing, you pay what you want, depending on what you want to wear and what you're prepared to spend on it. The world's your oyster here in Greece. There are fantastic clothes shops here. Then we come on to housewares and home furnishings and so on. Again, similar story. Go to Athens, you can get your top quality Italian designer sofas. If you want something cheaper, you can buy it from a local shop down in Argos or Nafplio or Kalamata or wherever you happen to be. It just depends what you want to spend. IKEA here is fantastic. There's one in Athens, a couple in Athens actually. There's one in Kalamata. They will deliver to the regions. Deliver out here, 180 kilometers from Athens, is about 30 euros. Perfectly reasonable if you're getting a pallet of goods delivered for a new apartment that you happen to be furnishing or something like that. And it's modern and it's cheap and it's functional and it won't fall apart instantly provided you put it together properly. So you have options here. And then finally electricals. Now electricals generally I find to be quite expensive in Greece. VAT here is 24%, and I find that compared to Northern Europe, the UK in particular, for example, electricals are 10 to 15% more expensive here, and it's very easy to compare, obviously. So your best bet is not to buy electricals here. Now you may have no choice. Big television or something, you have to suck it up, I guess. But a lot of stuff we buy using Amazon.de, which is the German Amazon site. They have an English version of it, they know their market, they deliver across Europe, and for 5 or 6 euros in a couple of days, normally 4 or 5 days, you will get your goods without issue here. It helps if you know your local delivery man, but if you live here, you'll get to know him fairly quickly. There are Greek sites as well. Scrooge, for example, comes to mind. But again, there seems to be a bit of a cartel when it comes to prices of electricals in Greece. They're all pretty damn expensive compared to the rest of Europe. So my advice is look on Amazon, try and bring things yourself. I often bring things in the suitcase from the UK, if they fit obviously, when we come from the UK, simply because it will save me money, even with the cost of putting a suitcase on the plane. So there you have it, our costs of living in Greece. I want to give you a quick summary. I reckon for about €1,000 a month, if you are focused only on the essentials, you can afford to live in Greece. Now, some people will live here on less and have less, and I fully appreciate that, as I said at the beginning of the video. But for us, about €1,000 a month, we're spending, let's say, €250 on the property itself. We're spending perhaps €150 on our car. We're spending about €500 a month on food. We're spending about €60 or €70 a month on mobile phones and the internet, and we're spending about €100 a month on healthcare. So all in all, essential costs about €1,000 a month averaged across the year, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. You could therefore say, okay, perhaps for €1,500 a month you can live comfortably in Greece. Comfortable depends on what you want. I'm not going to tell you what we live on. It's a little bit more than €1,500 a month, but the point here is that Greece, for people who have perhaps worked outside Greece, earned a salary outside Greece, have an income from outside Greece, is highly affordable, and you can have a fantastic life here if you want. So I hope this has been a useful video. Obviously, individual circumstances vary, and what you may need to live in Greece may vary considerably from what my wife and I choose to live on in Greece. But I think about €1,000 a month is where you need to be for your essential costs. You can spend a lot more if you choose to. You can probably spend a little bit less if you choose to. Obviously, it depends where you live and what you need to live on. But I think my wife and I are fairly typical of retirees in Greece, and I hope this has inspired you on your journey perhaps to live, to move, or to spend time in Greece. Thank you for watching. Please watch some of my other videos, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.